The morning in the Providence courtroom moved in quiet routine. The camera's red light over the door watched everything. Judge Caprio sat slightly forward, glasses low on his nose. He listened more than he spoke, steady and calm. Then the door opened. It wasn't loud, but conversation stopped at once. Every head turned toward the aisle. The man who walked in moved like someone used to attention. His navy suit fit perfectly. His tie the campaign blue everyone knew. An officer held the door. He passed without a nod. He paused just inside the room. His smile was wide and practiced, ready for cameras. His eyes, though, stayed cool, sliding along the benches, counting. The camera shifted toward him, and he adjusted without thinking. Chin a little higher, shoulders set, smile brightened half a shade. It looked less like coming to court and more like stepping onto a stage. The clerk read his name, and a soft murmur followed. City Councilman. People around town had been saying for months, he's clever, maybe too clever. On paper, he was here for a parking ticket. Improper parking during a heavy rainstorm. One checked box on a notice. But as he walked to the podium, he looked like a man expecting to manage the room, not answer to it. His shoes tapped a steady beat on the floor. By the time he reached the microphone, the courtroom had gone still. Judge Caprio looked up from the file. No smile, no frown, just that careful, weighing gaze. Their eyes met. The councilman's smile brightened by habit. He rested his fingertips on the podium and dipped his head. "Good morning, Your Honor," he said, voice smooth and ready. "It's an honor to be here, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "We'll talk about the circumstances in a moment," Caprio replied. "You received a citation for parking in a restricted zone during last Tuesday's storm, is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor, but it was really just a misunderstanding," the councilman said. His hands opened in a practiced gesture. "I had an urgent meeting about emergency services. In that rain, I could hardly see the signs. I pulled into the first place I thought was safe. Public safety had to come first." He packed urgent, emergency, public safety, and duty into one breath. It sounded less like an excuse and more like a speech. Then he added one detail too many. "When the officer came up to my car," he said, "she told me the area had been blocked off for almost an hour already." Caprio's thumb, resting on the ticket, stopped. The report said nothing about a blocked-off street, only a posted sign and a refusal to move the car. He raised his eyes, one eyebrow beginning to lift. From the back row, a quick, nervous laugh slipped out. The councilman's head snapped toward the sound, the smile gone for a heartbeat, his stare sharp and hard. Then the smile returned. Just a second. Late. Caprio saw the delay and the fingers pressing into the edge of the podium, trembling slightly. Whatever this morning had been a moment ago, it was no longer just a simple parking case. He adjusted the microphone as if preparing for a public announcement, not a simple identification. Judge Caprio folded his hands and said calmly, "Please state your name for the record." The councilman smiled with a kind of ceremonial pride. "Jonathan Hale, City Council, Ward 3. He paused, letting the title hang a beat too long. "I've spent years serving this community, always tried to uphold the law, support our institutions, you know, do the right thing." The words sounded polished, but the rhythm was off. Little hesitations that didn't fit the confidence he tried to project. His eyes flickered toward the camera, then toward the benches, as though checking whether his performance was landing. Caprio nodded once. "Mr. Hale, we appreciate public service, but today we're here about a citation, not a campaign speech." A few people in the room shifted, amused. Hale noticed, and his smile tightened. Trying to regain control, he leaned forward. "I only meant that I've always respected the rules. That's why this whole situation, well, it feels a bit unfair." I would never disregard posted signs intentionally. His voice carried a soft tremor at the end. Subtle, but there. Caprio glanced at the file again. You missed your earlier hearing. Why was that? That question landed harder than anything so far. Hale blinked, hesitated, then said, I was out of town on official business, a budget meeting in Hartford. A simple answer, until he added, without thinking, it lasted 2 days. We were there on the 19th and 20th. A whisper cut the silence. A man in the second row muttered to his neighbor, That's not what the paper said. Hale's head twitched slightly, pretending not to hear, but his jaw tightened. Caprio tapped his pen lightly. Mr. Hale, the Providence Journal printed a short piece about your visit to Hartford. It states the meetings were scheduled for the 18th and concluded the morning of the 19th. Hale exhaled with a soft, strained laugh. You know how these things go, Judge. Reporters never get the details exactly right. But the muscles at his throat pulsed faster. The smile didn't reach his eyes anymore. From the benches, someone whispered again, this time more clearly, Isn't he the guy from that Grant mess last summer? A woman beside him nodded. Their quiet exchange rippled through the courtroom like a draft of cold air. Hale heard it. His shoulders stiffened. Trying to push forward, he returned to the parking story. Anyway, that day in the storm, I was late for a meeting with community organizers. I parked only because I didn't want to block traffic. That's all. It sounded rehearsed. Too polished, too ready. Community organizers? Caprio asked. Which group? Hale blinked again. Ah, well, several groups have been reaching out lately. I meet many people, Judge. I can't recall every name on the spot. A flimsy answer, and both men knew it. Caprio's gaze held steady. Not challenging, simply watching, measuring. Hale shifted his weight, adjusting his cuffs, though they didn't need adjusting. His fingers bounced lightly on the edge of the podium, an almost imperceptible tremor betraying him. The judge's tone stayed quiet but firm. Mr. Hale, I feel like I've heard your name recently, somewhere outside this courtroom. For the first time, the smile dropped completely. Not dramatically, just a small collapse at the corners of his mouth, as though gravity had changed. He tried to recover. Providence is a small city, Judge. Everyone knows everyone. But the room had shifted. Listeners leaned in. Some exchanged glances. It wasn't hostility. It was curiosity sharpened into suspicion. And Hale felt it. He swallowed hard. A small, visible effort. Caprio didn't press further yet. He simply returned to the file as though giving the councilman space to breathe. But the silence that settled around Jonathan Hale wasn't mercy. It was the sound of a story beginning to unravel. Judge Caprio lifted the next page of the file, but he didn't look at it. His eyes stayed fixed on Hale with that quiet, steady focus that tended to make people reveal more than they intended. Let's go back to the day of the citation, he said. Why did you choose that particular spot? The question sounded routine. It wasn't. Hale inhaled sharply. As I mentioned, the rainfall was... Caprio cut in gently. I'm asking because it wasn't just a restricted zone. It was the area reserved for city service vehicles, specifically the Department of Infrastructure. He let that hang in the air. A long, brittle pause. Hale's fingers closed around the podium edge. The smile appeared again, but it cracked halfway into existence. I didn't realize that, Judge. I couldn't see the signs in that storm. Caprio nodded to the clerk. She touched a button, and the courtroom monitor blinked on, showing footage from the parking camera. Hale's SUV rolling past 2 open spaces, slowing, then circling back to the service-only area. In the video, he didn't hesitate. He drove straight into the one spot marked for infrastructure vehicles. A soft rustle moved through the room. Hale stared at the screen, blinking rapidly. "That angle is misleading," he said, voice thinning. "Rain distorts visibility." Someone in the back let out a low, skeptical sigh. Hale turned sharply, the old irritation flashing through, raw, unmasked for a second. His gaze had an edge that didn't belong to the smiling public servant he'd tried to play. When he faced forward again, the mask was back, but the seams showed. Caprio picked up a small report. The officer wrote that when she asked you to move, you replied, "I decide where I'm allowed to stand. Write it down." A ripple moved across the benches. Hale opened his mouth, closed it, then forced out, "Misunderstanding. I said I'd stand by my decision. Not that I had authority." But the phrasing felt improvised, not remembered. Caprio leaned back slightly. "Were you meeting with someone from the Department of Infrastructure that day?" Hale's reaction was too fast, too sharp. "No, absolutely not," which only made the room lean in closer. Before Caprio could speak again, a hand rose from the third row. A woman in a tan coat stood, cautious but firm. "Your Honor, I apologize if this is out of order." She swallowed. "But I was on that street that morning. I saw something." Hale stiffened so abruptly his shoulder twitched. Caprio gestured gently. "Go on, ma'am." "I was walking to my office," she said. It was still raining. "I noticed the councilman step out of a black SUV. A man came up to him, said nothing, and handed him a thick envelope." Mr. Hale looked around first, like checking if anyone was watching. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Even the camera operator froze. Hale's face didn't move for 2 seconds. Then he laughed, a short, tinny sound that didn't match the panic in his eyes. "This is ridiculous. People mistake things all the time. Probably documents for a meeting. I receive materials constantly." But his throat tightened visibly, and he gripped the podium so hard his knuckles whitened. Caprio didn't react with surprise. He simply studied Hale with a calm that somehow felt more dangerous than anger. "Mr. Hale," he said quietly, "this is beginning to sound like more than a parking ticket." It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation, and it landed heavier than any charge. A woman near the aisle crossed her arms, watching him closely. Someone in the back whispered, "Envelope?" Another murmured, "This is bad." Hale looked around, breath shallow, as if realizing the room wasn't an audience he could sway anymore. These were witnesses, not to his story, but to its collapse. Caprio folded his hands. "Let's continue," he said, voice gentle in a way that made the tension sharper. The councilman nodded once, stiffly, but the room could feel it. His performance was over. The unraveling had begun. Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward or strike the bench. He simply turned slightly toward the woman in the tan coat and said, "Thank you, ma'am," with the same courtesy he'd use if she'd told him the time of day. That calmness made the air tighten even more. He looked back at Hale. "She mentioned an envelope. Let's clarify that." Tiny pulse jumped at the corner of Hale's jaw. He spoke quickly, too quickly. "Your Honor, I don't know what she thinks she saw. People hand me folders, mail, notes. Public officials get materials constantly." "But you looked around first," the woman added quietly. Hale spun toward her, lips parting as if he might snap. But he stopped just short, realizing half the courtroom was watching his reaction more closely than his words. Caprio gave him no time to recover. "Mr. Hale, another matter came to my attention this morning." He lifted a sheet from the folder, thin, unassuming, but dangerous. Hale's shoulders drew in without him noticing. "What matter?" Caprio slid the page slightly forward. A second citation, same officer, same street, 1 week earlier. A murmur rolled through the benches. Hale blinked, genuinely thrown for a moment. That must be a mistake. I don't recall. It's not a mistake, Caprio said gently. You told the officer you didn't see the sign. That seems to be a recurring problem for you on that block. A flicker of panic crossed Hale's expression before he smothered it beneath another brittle smile. I have a demanding schedule, Judge. It's easy to overlook a detail when you're juggling. Caprio interrupted with the faintest lift of his hand. A detail? You parked at the same department twice, on work days, in a restricted area, during hours in which you had no scheduled meetings with them. Each point landed like a slow heartbeat. Hale swallowed. I often visit departments informally to check on ongoing projects. It's part of staying engaged with the community. But you weren't signed in either time, Caprio replied. The room stilled. Even the fluorescent lights seemed quieter. Hale opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Your Honor, I think this is drifting into areas that have nothing to do with parking. We're discussing rumors, unverified observations. I shouldn't be subjected to... You were the one who brought up your schedule, Caprio said, calm as ever. I'm only asking what any reasonable person would ask. Hale's breathing grew shallow. His fingers tapped the podium in uneven bursts, the tremor more pronounced now. He wasn't acting anymore. He was scrambling. Then it happened. A slip. A crack. The first true fracture in his polished surface. I didn't have a choice, he snapped, voice breaking through the thin veneer of composure. I was asked to come by, that's all. The room froze. Caprio leaned forward just an inch. Asked by whom? Hale's eyes widened. He realized what he'd said only after the words had escaped. He forced a laugh, but his voice quivered. I meant constituents. People always want to meet. I was simply... Mr. Hale, Caprio said patiently, you didn't say constituents. You said you were asked to come. Silence folded around them. Even the woman in the tan coat seemed to stop breathing. A man in the back whispered, he slipped. Someone else hissed, he's hiding something. Hale stared down at the podium, as if trying to will the wood grain to swallow him. Judge Caprio didn't pounce. He didn't need to. His voice stayed soft, almost reassuring. When people tell the truth, it tends to come out cleanly, he said. When they don't, things get tangled. Hale closed his eyes for a moment, just long enough for the camera to catch it. A tired, defeated blink. He straightened, forcing himself back into the role he'd rehearsed for decades. But the illusion was gone. His posture was still tall, his tie still perfect, his smile technically in place. Yet everything about him looked unsteady, like a structure whose foundation had quietly cracked. And everyone in the room felt it. This wasn't just a man defending a parking ticket. This was someone trying and failing to hold together an entire story built on fragile lies. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Judge Caprio waited with the patience of someone who'd sat through thousands of stories and knew exactly when a person reached the edge of one. Hale stood rigidly, jaw clenched, breath uneven. The confidence he'd worn as armor had thinned to something brittle and transparent. Caprio repeated quietly, "Who asked you to come?" The question didn't sound accusatory. It sounded inevitable. Hale's lips parted, but no sound came. His silence stretched so long that even the rustle of people shifting in their seats stopped. The entire courtroom seemed to recognize that the pause itself was an answer. Finally, Hale exhaled, long and defeated. It was Daniel Royce. A ripple moved through the benches, sharp, immediate. A few people exchanged startled looks. Royce wasn't a small name in Providence, a contractor with deep pockets and deeper influence. He had funded campaigns, built half the new developments downtown, and appeared at more ribbon cuttings than the mayor. Hale didn't look at the room. He kept his eyes fixed on the empty middle distance, as though afraid of seeing anyone's reaction. "He supported my last campaign," Hale continued, voice strained. He said we needed to talk off the record. That's all." His fingers curled against the podium. "It wasn't anything illegal?" Caprio's tone remained level. "Then why the secrecy?" Hale swallowed. His Adam's apple jerked. "Because people assume the worst. Because any meeting looks suspicious these days. Because politics is full of misunderstandings." His words tumbled out too fast, collapsing into each other. Caprio let him finish. Then, gently, "What was in the envelope?" Hale's shoulders sagged as if the weight he'd tried to hide finally pinned him down. "It wasn't money." "Good," Caprio said softly. "What was it?" Hale hesitated, then spoke so quietly the microphone barely caught it. "A list." "A list of what?" He closed his eyes briefly, gathering himself. "Names, companies Royce wanted supported during the upcoming infrastructure tender. He wanted influence, and he said it wouldn't hurt if I reminded certain departments of who helped get them new equipment last year." A hushed gasp swept through the room, a collective intake of breath sharp enough to slice the silence. The woman in the tan coat pressed a hand to her mouth. A man near the aisle shook his head slowly. Someone whispered, "Unbelievable." Hale kept talking, his voice fraying at the edges. "It wasn't supposed to be anything formal, just guidance, informal support. I didn't agree to anything." He forced a bitter smile. "I just took the envelope." Caprio didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice carried a weight no volume could add. "Mr. Hale," he said, "the law isn't a tool for those who hold power. It's a promise that power must answer to." The words seemed to hit harder than any accusation. Hale blinked rapidly, fighting the heat gathering in his eyes. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even defensive. He looked like someone who finally realized he'd crossed a line long before this morning, and only now saw how far he'd wandered from it. Caprio continued, his tone firm, but not cruel. "You came in today insisting this was about a simple mistake, but you've revealed far more than a misplaced car. You've shown how easily duty can bend when no one is watching." The entire room felt suspended between breath and silence. Hale's voice broke as he whispered, "I didn't mean for it to go this way." "I believe you," Caprio said, "but intention doesn't erase truth." Hale lowered his gaze. His hands, once so steady and rehearsed, now trembled openly on the podium. He didn't hide it anymore. Caprio spoke one last time, not as a judge delivering punishment, but as a man offering a moment of clarity. "You've carried this weight alone for a long time. It shows. But today, the truth isn't your enemy. It's your way back." A strangled breath escaped Hale, a sound somewhere between relief and despair. The courtroom remained utterly still, watching the fall of a man who had built his career on certainty and now stood exposed, stripped of every practiced line and polished gesture. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't spectacle. It was the quiet breaking of someone who finally faced himself. The room held a heavy stillness, the kind that settles only after something irreversible has been spoken. Judge Caprio slowly closed the folder, not with finality, but with the calm deliberation of someone recognizing the end of one chapter and the uncertain start of another. "Mr. Hale," he began, "the citation stands. A restricted zone parking violation carries a fine, and you will pay it." No surprise flickered on Hale's face. The fine was irrelevant now. Everyone knew it. But, Caprio continued, your real penalty walked into this room with you. The truth you revealed is not mine to investigate or resolve. But I assure you, it will not remain within these walls. A faint stir moved through the benches, quiet, tinged with gravity. Hale's eyes lifted, searching the judge's expression for hostility, judgment, anything sharp. He found none. What he saw instead was something far more unsettling, a steady, almost sorrowful sincerity. Hale drew in a shaky breath and whispered, "This isn't the end." He didn't say it with arrogance or anger. There was no threat in the words, only the thin, exhausted recognition that his life outside this courtroom had just changed in ways he could no longer control. Caprio answered with a calm that softened the room. Endings aren't verdicts. They're crossroads. And a crossroads is where a person decides whether they'll keep running or finally stop hiding. The phrase lingered, settling deeply into the listeners, an echo stronger than any gavel. Hale looked down. For the first time that morning, he didn't adjust his cuffs, didn't straighten his tie, didn't attempt a smile. The small movements that once kept him composed had deserted him, leaving only the stark stillness of a man who'd been stripped to the truth. A brief scrape of a chair broke the quiet. The woman in the tan coat, the one who had spoken up, stood and made her way toward the aisle. As she passed the door, the camera caught her murmuring to a companion, "At least someone finally said the truth out loud." Her voice wasn't triumphant. It carried relief, quiet, overdue, and real. Hale heard it. His eyes fluttered shut for a moment, as though the remark pierced deeper than anything Caprio had said. The judge leaned toward his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he concluded, "this court reminds us that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about reflection, seeing ourselves clearly, even when it's painful." He paused before delivering the final line, his voice steady but warm. "We built a system where even a small ticket can become a mirror, and today, that mirror showed something important." The room remained utterly still, absorbing every word. Hale stepped back from the podium as though it suddenly carried weight. He stood for a moment, not moving, not speaking. Then he nodded faintly, almost to himself, and walked toward the exit, each step slower than the last. No one jeered, no one clapped. People simply watched him go, understanding that whatever waited for him outside wasn't judgment from the court, but the long, unavoidable confrontation with the consequences he had dodged for years. Judge Caprio gathered his papers, glanced around the room, and offered a gentle nod to the gallery. The moment felt strangely reverent, as though everyone sensed they had witnessed more than a legal proceeding. They had witnessed a turning point. And as the door closed behind Jonathan Hale, the lingering thought in the air wasn't about the ticket, or the envelope, or the scandal soon to follow. It was the deeper truth Caprio had drawn out. Real justice doesn't end with a verdict. It begins when someone stops pretending and finally sees themselves.